guys, it's Glenn from glenscarcollection.com, and today we're going to talk about a great mid-engine car that you could buy for under $50,000. All right, so today we're going to talk about the 981 Cayman, which is the second generation Cayman after the 987. Now, the 981 Cayman here in the United States was only produced 3 model years, 2014 to 2016. It was available with a manual transmission or a PDK transmission, and most of them were actually sold with PDK transmissions. And it was mid-engine. It had a 3.4-liter flat six, producing 325 horsepower, about 272 foot-pounds of torque. And the GTS versions, the last versions of these cars, were actually available with 340 horsepower. And then in 2016, also became the GT4. But I think the buy is the S. The GTSs are still kind of high, and we'll get to all that in this video. I have a full review that I did last year of a 2014 Cayman S, so you should watch that video. I'm not going to get into the stuff in that video. In this video, I try to do something different every time. So I'll link that video all the way at the end. You can watch the full review where we go over everything. I think these are a really good used car buy. That car was provided to us by DCH Acura to do the review, and at the time, it was for sale for under 50 grand, about $47,000. I should have bought it myself, because that same car, because a lot of people don't like the 4-cylinder turbo of the 718, is now about 50 grand. So then the last year, about 12 months or so, that car actually went up about $3,000. So there's still, I think, a very good buy at $50,000. It should be interesting what's going to happen to those values. So now that the 4.0 GTS was announced on the 718 chassis, it's going to be interesting if that's going to devalue these normally aspirated cars. Because right now, you could get a 2017 718 Cayman S for essentially the same price as a GTS of the 981 version. They're basically about 60 grand, even in the high 50s. So I think the naturally aspirated 981, even though the 718 is faster and handles even better, they both handle great, but a lot of people don't like the 4-cylinder sound. I love the 718. The only thing I don't like about it is the sound. The 981 is not as fast, handles almost as good, and obviously sounds fantastic. So that's why they've been holding their value. So now as we have GTSs coming in the next year or so with the 4.0, I think you're actually going to see the GTS and 981Ss actually drop, and that's probably going to be the time to buy, because I think they're going to settle probably, around 40 for a Cayman S and probably around 50 for a GTS, and I think they'll hold that value for a long time, and they're very reliable cars. So I think the way to get it, the manual transmissions seem to be holding their value more, but the good news is if you want PDK, this is probably the first PDK I would buy. I wouldn't buy the 987.2 cars with the PDK that came out in 2009. I think from 2009 to 2012, it wasn't there yet. The shifts are kind of laggy. They're a little slower. Though it was fantastic and people thought it was very good back in 2009, you see technology kind of caught up to it. And now when you go back and look at the car, you're like, oh, it wasn't that great. So 2014 and up is the first time I would really consider PDK. But if you can get a manual transmission, so the sound is right behind your head, it's mid-engine, so you get that great handling. The brakes are very good. They hold up for track use. And obviously, rolling through the gears or PDK, it's a phenomenal car. 0 to 60 time is about 4.7 seconds, give or take. The 987 Caymans, the first ones were about 5.3, like the one I had. 987.2 is a little more horsepower, a little quicker. They're probably around 5 seconds flat. So now with the 981Ss, we're about like 4.7, 4.8 to 60. So not as fast as some, modern cars, not as fast as the M2, not as fast as an F80 M3, but still a fantastic driving car, and you can't go wrong with the mid-engine. They're very reliable cars. The problem is with the S's, the GTSs have all the performance options, so you'll get PASM, Sport Chrono, Sport Exhaust, and those are almost impossible to find in an S. So the review that I did of that 2014 S had almost like no options. It didn't have Sport Chrono, which gives you the Sport Plus mode. It didn't have the PASM, which gives you the soft and, I'll call it track settings for the suspension. It didn't have the Sport Exhaust, though it sounded great, and I thought it was quick driving that car, so definitely watch that review. But, be careful with the S. Try to get those options if you can. You can always put on an exhaust, so I don't think you really need the Sport Exhaust. If you can find one with it, then that's great. But I would try to get Sport Chrono and PASM. PASM gives you the adjustable suspension. The car sits a little lower. I noticed that they handle much better, especially if you go with bigger wheels. So with the 981s, you can get 20-inch wheels, and the ride is pretty harsh with the 19s or 20s if you don't have that passive suspension. And the Sport Chrono obviously gives you, this Sport Plus mode and everything. So it's It's just, you get the most fulfilling out of the car. GTS versions are still about 60 grand. I've seen them for like 60, 62, 65. I think those are going to go down now. It might take a year with the 4.0. So if you want a GTS, I would wait a little longer. If you want an S, now may be the time to buy. So there's nothing really not to like about this car. Now, the Cayman complex, people feel, oh, they should get a 911, or people that don't own Porsches or never drove a Cayman or a Boxer say, oh, those are people can't afford it. Well, I've had a Cayman S and two 911s, and honestly, I prefer the Cayman S better. I prefer the mid-engine over the rear engine. I prefer handling over outright performance. Now, I've driven them on the track back-to-back with 911s, and the 911s are definitely faster. If you live where the roads are more open, more straight, you'll probably like the power of the 911. You'll have to learn that rear engine bias and how to handle it and get the most out of the car. I think the mid-engine car, especially if you have less driving skill, because you still have stability control, traction control, all that stuff, you're not going to spin out, is easier to drive fast and easier to get more comfortable with. But here where I live in the Northeast, even the highways have turns. There's no straightaways, so I really prefer the handling. If I lived out west where the roads are open, I think you can make a very strong case with the 911, but don't not buy a Cayman S just because people tell you you couldn't afford the 911. There are cheaper 911s too. But I think this Cayman is modern enough. The navigation isn't very good, so you don't need to have a car with nav, and a lot of them don't. But it's still a new enough car that it's not that expensive to fix. You can find independent mechanics if you don't want to go to the dealer and pay full prices. But, the electronics are there. You won't have a backup camera, so that's really important to you. You got to go to the 718 if you want a backup camera. But the visibility is pretty good. You could see at the back, and I don't think you'll have a problem with that. But I think these are going to be a really good buy, so keep an eye out for it. And you choose your transmission. If you want PDK, get PDK. If you want a manual, get a manual. Thanks again for watching, guys. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.